The airport was crowded. People rushed through the gates, dragging bags, checking their phones, and looking tired. Announcements echoed in the air. Flight 726 to Chicago is now boarding. Among the busy crowd, a quiet woman stood alone near Gate 12. She looked simple. She wore plain clothes, black pants, a soft beige sweater, and a small scarf. No makeup, no fancy jewelry. Her hair was tied back neatly. She carried one medium bag and walked calmly. Most people didn't notice her. She didn't look rich. She didn't look important. She simply looked normal. When the gate opened, passengers started boarding. Families, businessmen, young couples, and tired tourists all pushed forward. The quiet woman waited. She didn't rush. When the crowd cleared a bit, she walked slowly toward the gate and showed her boarding pass. The flight attendant at the gate smiled politely, but didn't say much. She scanned the pass and nodded. Seat 14A. Have a nice flight. The woman thanked her with a soft voice and entered the plane. Inside, the plane buzzed with noise. People were finding their seats, putting bags in the overhead bins, and talking loudly. Children cried, and someone sneezed nearby. The quiet woman looked around and walked toward row 14. She reached her seat -14A by the window and gently placed her bag under the seat in front of her. She sat down, buckled her belt, and looked outside. The sky was cloudy. The sun peeked through now and then. She didn't speak. She just stared out the window with calm eyes. A few minutes later, the main door of the plane opened again. A loud voice filled the cabin. Another full flight. Just what I needed. It was the pilot. He had just boarded and was walking toward the front, passing the seated passengers. He was tall, with slicked back hair, sunglasses still on, and a strong smell of cologne. A young flight attendant walked beside him, laughing at his jokes. As they passed row 14, the quiet woman was still fixing her scarf and adjusting her seatbelt. She moved slowly, carefully. The pilot smirked and made a comment, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some people shouldn't fly at all if they can't even sit down fast. The flight attendant chuckled nervously, looking at the woman but saying nothing. Passengers in nearby seats turned their heads. The woman looked up just for a moment. She didn't speak. She didn't frown. She didn't show anger. But her eyes, those calm, deep eyes, looked straight at the pilot for a few seconds. Then she looked away. The pilot kept walking, still talking loudly about how tired he was and how he hated flying economy flights. He entered the cockpit and slammed the door shut. The woman in seat 14A remained quiet. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing something. Nobody knew what it was. A man sitting in 14B, next to her, glanced over and smiled politely. "First time flying?" he asked kindly. She smiled back. "Not at all. I've flown many times." He was surprised. "Oh, I thought." The way the pilot acted, maybe. She shook her head. "Sometimes people see only what they want to see." The man nodded slowly, feeling embarrassed for even asking. Across the aisle, a teenage girl whispered to her mother, "Why did the pilot say that to her?" Her mother replied, "Because some people judge others too quickly." The plane slowly filled up. More people took their seats. Flight attendants walked up and down, doing safety checks. But now, a few of them were whispering. One of them had noticed something in the woman's bag when she was seated. It was a file folder. And on that folder, just barely visible, were the words, "Phoenix Airlines. Confidential." The woman placed the folder back into her bag and zipped it shut. She looked out the window again, calm and peaceful. But something in her face had changed. She didn't look like just a quiet woman anymore. She looked like someone with a secret, someone with power, someone who was watching. And slowly the people around her started to feel it too. Maybe she wasn't just any passenger. Maybe she was someone very important. And maybe The pilot had just made a very big mistake. The plane took off smoothly, the engines roaring as the aircraft ascended into the sky. The passengers were settling in for the long flight. Some were reading, others sleeping, and a few were staring out the window, just like the quiet woman in seat 14A. She had closed her eyes, but she wasn't sleeping. She was simply taking in the peaceful moment, surrounded by the noise of the cabin, the hum of the plane, and the occasional chatter of the crew as they made their rounds. But outside of the calm atmosphere, the flight was far from peaceful for everyone else. From the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 30,000 feet, and we'll be reaching our destination in just a few hours. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask the flight attendants." But the captain's voice was not the only one that could be heard. A few moments later, he came out of the cockpit. He walked down the aisle, clearly enjoying the attention as he passed the rows of passengers. He was tall, well-groomed, and wearing a confident smirk. As he walked, he spoke loudly, not caring who heard him. Some people just don't know how to get on a plane. Takes them forever to sit down, take their shoes off, and get comfortable. It's like they've never traveled before, he said, laughing with the flight attendant beside him. The woman in seat 14A could feel the eyes of nearby passengers turned toward her. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. The pilot's words hung in the air for a moment. The passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some were embarrassed for the woman. Others were unsure whether to say something. But no one spoke up, except for one man sitting near the front. He turned toward the woman in 14A and with a loud whisper said, "Don't mind him. Some people get their power from making others feel small." The woman gave him a small, polite smile, but said nothing. She turned her attention back to the window. Her face was calm, almost serene. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. She had heard the captain's mocking words, and she hadn't forgotten them. The flight continued, and the crew moved through the aisles. The pilot made his way back to the front, still chatting and laughing with the flight attendants. As he passed 14A again, he made another loud comment. "Well, at least she's not asking for more snacks. Some people on these flights act like they're starving. Ridiculous." Again, no one responded. The woman didn't even acknowledge him. But the passengers around her were starting to feel uncomfortable. Whispers spread through the cabin. Some began to wonder if she had a connection to the airline. Others thought she might be someone important, perhaps even someone in charge. But no one knew for sure. Meanwhile, the flight attendants started their rounds with the drink cart. When they reached the woman in 14A, one of them, who had seen the Phoenix Airlines confidential folder earlier, glanced at her with a new look of respect. But she didn't say anything. The woman simply asked for a glass of water, which was handed to her without any trouble. As the attendant moved on, she couldn't help but wonder if the woman was indeed connected to the airline's upper management. Something about the way she held herself, the quiet power in her presence, it was undeniable. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the turbulence stopped. The flight became smoother. The air grew still, and most of the passengers were starting to relax. They'd read, watched movies, or closed their eyes. But the woman in 14A remained alert. She had been paying attention to the captain's behavior, to how he mocked her silently, and to the way he treated the crew and passengers. She saw how he was quick to belittle others, how his arrogance showed in every word. He didn't respect the people he served, and he certainly didn't respect her. Now she was wondering what to do about it. A few hours passed. The plane flew through the clouds, drifting over cities and mountains below. Then the intercom came to life once again. But this time, the pilot's voice was different. He sounded distracted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're starting our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts and make sure your seat backs are upright." Then, just as he was about to sign off, he added with a chuckle, "And don't worry, I'll get us there safely, eventually." It was a careless joke, but no one laughed this time. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some felt uncomfortable, and a few started to whisper again. The woman in 14A knew it was time. She had waited long enough. She closed her notebook, stood up, and walked toward the front of the plane. The flight attendants saw her approach, and their eyes widened. The woman didn't speak to anyone, but the tension in the air grew. When she reached the cockpit door, the co-pilot was the first to notice her. He stepped forward, clearly surprised. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you?" he asked, a bit nervous. She looked him in the eye, calm but firm. "Yes, I need to speak to the captain." The co-pilot hesitated, glancing at the closed cockpit door. He's not available right now." The woman didn't move. She simply said, "I insist." The suspense reached its peak as the quiet woman stood her ground. Who was she really? And what was she about to do next? The plane hummed steadily as it made its way through the sky, but inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The quiet woman in 14A had just walked to the front of the plane, and every passenger in the cabin could feel that something was about to happen. As the woman stood in front of the cockpit door, the co-pilot looked at her, uncertain. He was clearly uncomfortable but couldn't show it. He had been on enough flights to know when things were about to get tense. "Excuse me, ma'am," the co-pilot said politely, trying to hide his nervousness. "The captain is preparing for the descent. He's not available right now." The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply looked at him with calm eyes, unbothered by the tension in the air. "I said I need to speak with the captain," she replied softly but firmly. Her voice was steady, yet it carried an undeniable authority. The co-pilot hesitated for a moment, then turned back toward the cockpit door. He seemed to be debating whether to allow her in. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded. "All right, ma'am. Please wait just a moment." He knocked on the cockpit door and opened it slightly. "Captain, there's a woman here to speak with you," he said, his voice low and cautious. The captain, who had been busy preparing for the plane's descent, looked up in surprise. He wasn't expecting any interruptions, let alone from a passenger. "What's this about?" he asked, clearly irritated by the interruption. He hadn't yet realized who this woman was. His ego was too big for him to imagine that someone in economy class would have anything important to say. The co-pilot stepped aside, allowing the woman to approach the cockpit. "Captain," the woman said again, her voice calm but powerful, "I've seen enough. I'm the CEO of Phoenix Airlines." The captain froze. For a moment, he couldn't move. His mind raced, trying to process what she had just said. He thought she was joking. Surely, this couldn't be true. She looked like a regular passenger, not someone in charge of an entire airline. But then, his confusion began to fade, and the weight of her words sank in. The woman stepped closer, her calm demeanor making the tension in the cockpit even more palpable. She was not shouting. She wasn't angry. She was simply stating the truth, and it was clear that the captain had no idea what to do with it. You're the CEO," the captain stammered, his face paling. "Yes," the woman answered, her voice cool and composed. "And you've failed your review. The way you've treated passengers, the way you've treated the crew, it's unacceptable." The captain's face flushed with embarrassment. He had spent the entire flight mocking passengers and showing off his authority. He had believed that no one was watching, that no one would care. But now, standing before him was the one person who mattered the most. The CEO. Back in the cabin, passengers were starting to take notice of what was happening at the front of the plane. Whispers began to spread. Some passengers who had noticed the woman in 14A earlier now looked back toward the cockpit, their curiosity piqued. "What's going on up there?" one passenger asked quietly. "I think she's the CEO," another passenger replied, wide-eyed. "The one they just hired." "Wait, seriously," someone else whispered. "She was just sitting there, acting like nobody." The mystery woman in 14A was no longer just a quiet passenger. She had a purpose, and now, everyone on board was dying to know what would happen next. Inside the cockpit, the tension was thick. The captain was trying to recover from his shock, but it was clear that his arrogance had led him into a deep pit. He hadn't expected someone with such power to be on this flight. Outside the cockpit, the cabin was completely still. The flight attendants who had overheard the conversation exchanged looks of shock. They had never seen the captain like this, and they had never seen a passenger so calm, yet so commanding. The woman in seat 14A had turned out to be far more than just another quiet traveler. She had been watching. She had been listening. And now, she was taking action. The flight attendants began to whisper to each other, sharing what they had learned. The word spread quickly, and soon everyone in the cabin knew. She was the CEO of Phoenix Airlines, and she had just exposed the pilot for his disrespectful behavior. As the plane continued its journey toward the destination, the air in the cabin shifted. The passengers who had witnessed the exchange now looked at the woman in a new light. Some were amazed, others were impressed by her confidence and grace. No one could deny the strength she had shown in the face of disrespect. And the captain. He was left in the cockpit, struggling to regain his composure, but knowing that his career might never be the same. The plane continued its smooth flight, but the mood inside had changed. What had started as a calm journey now felt charged with tension. Passengers exchanged glances, some still in disbelief about what had just happened. The woman in seat 14A, who had revealed herself as the CEO of Phoenix Airlines, had just confronted the captain, and now the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. It was as if everyone was waiting for something else to happen. But the woman didn't speak again. She returned to her seat, her face calm, as though nothing out of the ordinary had just occurred. She picked up her notebook once more and began writing, as if she had all the time in the world. The flight attendants, who had been nervous after hearing the confrontation, now moved about with more purpose, but there was an unspoken respect in their eyes when they passed her seat. Back in the cockpit, the captain's face was flushed with embarrassment. He had never imagined he would be in this position. He had mocked passengers, thinking they were beneath him, and now the person who could end his career had just sat in economy and caught him in the act. The co-pilot sat silently beside him, unsure of what to say. "Captain," the co-pilot finally said, "do you think she'll report us?" "I don't know," the captain muttered, his voice low. "But I'm not going to make it easy for her." His eyes narrowed. He had spent years climbing the ranks of Phoenix Airlines, and he wasn't about to let one encounter with a passenger destroy everything. He knew the CEO had power, but the captain's pride was stronger. "We'll see how she handles this," the captain said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Let's finish the flight and deal with this later." Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the woman in 14A was still calm. But as the hours passed, a slight turbulence began to shake the plane. The weather outside had turned cloudy, and the air pressure began to shift. Passengers tensed, gripping their armrests as the plane bounced slightly. The flight attendants remained calm, moving down the aisles, offering reassurance to nervous passengers. The woman, however, didn't seem bothered by the turbulence. Her calmness only made her stand out more. It was as if she had already faced far worse challenges than a little bumpy flight. The turbulence grew stronger, rocking the plane more sharply now. A few people gasped, and the flight attendants quickly worked to reassure everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts," came the captain's voice over the intercom. It was the same reassuring tone he had used earlier, but there was a hint of stress in his voice now. The passengers could hear it clearly. As the plane shook, some passengers began to whisper about the CEO in 14A. They couldn't help themselves. The woman who had exposed the pilot's behavior had been so calm throughout the stormy confrontation. And now she remained as composed as ever, even as the turbulence made the flight more difficult. One passenger in the row behind her leaned forward. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The woman turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "I'm fine," she said simply, her voice steady. "The storm outside won't last forever. neither will the turbulence. The man blinked, taken aback by how calm she was. You really believe that, don't you? She smiled softly. I do. As the minutes passed, the turbulence seemed to worsen. The plane began to shake more aggressively, and the lights flickered slightly. Some passengers began to feel the anxiety rising. The thought of being caught in a storm at 30,000 feet wasn't easy to shake off. The flight attendants continued their duties, moving with controlled efficiency. But it was clear to everyone that the situation was starting to feel serious. At the front of the cabin, the woman in 14A was still calm, but now she seemed to sense the growing tension in the cabin. Her eyes scanned the passengers briefly, noticing the nervous looks and the increasing whispers. Without warning, she stood up from her seat. The flight attendants, already on edge, noticed her right away. One of them quickly approached her, her face a mix of curiosity and concern. Ma'am, I recommend you stay seated. The turbulence might get worse, the flight attendant said gently. But the woman shook her head and smiled reassuringly. I'm not worried, she said. But I think it's time to make an announcement. The flight attendant frowned. An announcement. But the captain. Don't worry about him, the woman replied calmly. I'll handle it. Without waiting for a response, the woman walked toward the front of the plane. A few seconds later, the cabin lights dimmed briefly as the intercom came to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your CEO speaking. The voice was calm and clear. Every passenger in the cabin froze. The CEO. They had all heard the whispers, and now they were all listening closely. The woman who had just exposed the captain for his disrespectful behavior was speaking directly to them. I know the turbulence is making some of you uneasy, the woman continued. But I assure you, we are in capable hands. I've flown through storms much worse than this, and I promise you this one will pass. Please stay seated, stay calm, and trust that we are on track for a safe landing. The passengers listened in stunned silence. The woman's voice was like a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. They felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over them, as though her words carried weight they couldn't ignore. The turbulence began to ease. The plane's shaking softened, and the skies seemed to clear just a little. The passengers relaxed slightly, feeling a sense of relief. The woman's presence, her calmness in the face of the storm, had worked its magic. It wasn't just her words, it was how she carried herself. Every passenger on board knew now that she wasn't just the CEO of Phoenix Airlines. She was someone who had strength in the face of adversity, someone who could lead them through anything. And the captain? He remained silent in the cockpit, knowing full well that his mistake had not only cost him his dignity, but had also made him realize something far more important. Sometimes the most powerful people were the ones who didn't need to show it. As the plane descended smoothly toward its destination, the passengers knew one thing for sure. They would never forget this flight. They had witnessed not just a powerful leader, but a woman who had shown them all what true strength looked like. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your CEO speaking. The voice was calm and clear. Every passenger in the cabin froze. The CEO. They had all heard the whispers, and now they were all listening closely. The woman who had just exposed the captain for his disrespectful behavior was speaking directly to them. I know the turbulence is making some of you uneasy, the woman continued. But I assure you, we are in capable hands. I've flown through storms much worse than this, and I promise you this one will pass. Please stay seated, stay calm, and trust that we are on track for a safe landing. The passengers listened in stunned silence. The woman's voice was like a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. They felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over them, as though her words carried weight they couldn't ignore. The turbulence began to ease. The plane's shaking softened, and the skies seemed to clear just a little. The passengers relaxed slightly, feeling a sense of relief. The woman's presence, her calmness in the face of the storm, had worked its magic. It wasn't just her words, it was how she carried herself. Every passenger on board knew now that she wasn't just the CEO of Phoenix Airlines. She was someone who had strength in the face of adversity, someone who could lead them through anything. And the captain? He remained silent in the cockpit, knowing full well that his mistake had not only cost him his dignity, but had also made him realize something far more important. Sometimes the most powerful people were the ones who didn't need to show it. As the plane descended smoothly toward its destination, the passengers knew one thing for sure: they would never forget this flight. They had witnessed not just a powerful leader, but a woman who had shown them all what true strength looked like. The days that followed the flight were a whirlwind. News about the CEO's calm, powerful response to the situation spread quickly throughout the airline. What had started as a quiet, almost forgotten moment in a busy terminal became the story that everyone was talking about. Back at Phoenix Airlines headquarters, the woman who had once sat in seat 14A as just another passenger was now a figure of inspiration. Her actions had sent shockwaves through the company, and many employees began to see her in a new light. Her calm during the turbulent flight wasn't just about handling an emergency. It was a reminder of what real leadership looked like. The CEO wasn't just someone who sat in an office making decisions. She was someone who took action when it mattered most. In the captain's office, things weren't as calm. His career had been shaken to its core. He had never imagined a moment like this would come, where his arrogance would be exposed for all to see. The decision to mock the woman had cost him his dignity, and it was clear that Phoenix Airlines was not a place for people who didn't respect the passengers or their fellow crew members. The captain sat in front of a panel of senior airline executives. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting nervously. The room was quiet, and he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. "You made a mistake," one of the executives said sternly. "A big one. The CEO isn't someone you mock. She's the one who owns this company." "I know," the captain replied, his voice shaky. "I never thought she was the CEO. If I had known." "That's the point," another executive snapped. "You didn't take the time to respect the people around you. And now look where we are. You're lucky she's handling this with more grace than you ever showed." The room was silent as the captain's shoulders slumped. He had no excuse. He had only himself to blame. Meanwhile, at the airport, the woman who had once been a passenger was now quietly making her rounds, checking on the airline's operations. She walked through the terminal, her presence calming everyone around her. Her eyes were steady, her mind focused on the future. She wasn't dwelling on the confrontation with the captain. She knew there was more work to do. It wasn't just about firing people or making headlines. It was about setting a standard. She had shown the entire staff of Phoenix Airlines that leadership wasn't about power. It was about character, about how you treated others, especially when no one was watching. She paused for a moment, looking out the large windows of the terminal. The sky was clear, the sun setting over the horizon. She took a deep breath. Everything felt different now. She had always known that leadership meant sacrifice, but it was more than that. It was about setting an example for others to follow. In the crew room, a group of flight attendants were talking quietly about the incident. They spoke in hushed tones, but there was a new sense of respect in their voices when they mentioned the CEO. "I can't believe how calm she was," one flight attendant said. "She didn't raise her voice, didn't get angry. She just took control of the situation." "She's amazing," another agreed. "I don't know many CEOs who would have handled that so well. She didn't even let the turbulence bother her." The group of attendants nodded in agreement. For them, the CEO was more than just a boss now. She was someone they looked up to, someone who had shown them what it meant to be a true leader. Back at headquarters, the CEO sat in her office, looking over some reports. The situation with the captain had been dealt with. Phoenix Airlines was moving forward, but she still felt the weight of the responsibility that came with her position. She wasn't just an executive. She was the face of a company that thousands of people trusted every day. Her decisions affected lives. And though she had handled the incident with the captain, she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But she was ready for them. Leadership wasn't about avoiding problems. It was about facing them head-on and making the hard choices. The phone on her desk rang, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, already knowing who it was. "Hello." "Hi, it's David from the board," came the voice on the other end. "I just wanted to thank you for your handling of the situation with the captain. The entire company is talking about it, and I think you've set a new tone for leadership here." She smiled softly, her eyes steady. "Thank you, David, but I don't need praise for doing what's right. It's the company we all work for." And what happened with the captain was a reminder of how important it is to treat everyone with respect. David paused, sensing the gravity in her words. "You're right. You've reminded all of us of the values we should be upholding here. We'll make sure something like this never happens again." The CEO nodded, her expression unwavering. "Good. Now let's focus on the future. We've got work to do." The next day, an official statement was released to the public. It was calm and composed, just like the CEO herself. The airline addressed the incident with the captain and assured passengers that they would continue to uphold the highest standards of safety and professionalism. There was no mention of names, just a promise to make things right. For the passengers, the story didn't end with a confrontation or a firing. It ended with a company that had learned from its mistakes, with a leader who had shown them all the power of integrity. At the same time, the CEO met with her staff, the flight attendants, and the pilots, letting them know that Phoenix Airlines would always be a place of respect. She thanked them for their hard work, reminding them that their commitment to safety and professionalism was what made the company great. And as the days passed, the airport hummed with a new energy. People worked with more care. There was a sense of pride in the air. The CEO had set a new example, and it was clear to everyone that things were changing for the better. In the end, the captain's mistake had brought something unexpected. It had shown the staff of Phoenix Airlines what kind of leader they truly needed. A leader who didn't just sit in an office, but one who led by example, one who was calm, strong, and fair. The incident with the CEO and the captain was just a chapter in the story of Phoenix Airlines. But it was a turning point, a reminder that real leadership is about respect, humility, and integrity. The morning sun bathed Phoenix Airlines headquarters in a soft glow, signaling the end of a chapter. The CEO, who had quietly turned the company upside down with her handling of the captain's mistake, sat at her desk once again. But this time, she wasn't reflecting on the past. She was focused on the future. The fallout from the incident had been significant. News outlets had covered the story, and employees across the company had felt the weight of the message. Leadership was about respect, and no one, no matter their position, was above the standards of the airline. What the CEO had done had set a new tone for the entire company, but now it was time to make a final decision. The captain's fate hung in the balance. After the incident, he had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. In the weeks that followed, he had done everything in his power to apologize. He had sent emails, met with senior executives, and even written a heartfelt letter to the CEO, begging for a second chance. But the question remained, could he be trusted again? In the executive meeting room, the CEO sat at the head of the table. Her team had gathered, ready to discuss the next steps. It was time to decide the captain's future with Phoenix Airlines. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO began, her voice steady and clear, "the situation with Captain Taylor has been thoroughly reviewed. We have his apology, we've heard his side, and we've examined his past performance. But the question we need to answer is this: can we trust him to represent Phoenix Airlines moving forward?" The room fell silent. Her words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. One of the executives, a seasoned leader named Greg, spoke up. "I know Captain Taylor has been a reliable pilot in the past, but what happened on that flight shows a serious lapse in judgment. It wasn't just about mocking a passenger. It was about a lack of respect for the people around him, the crew, the passengers, and the company itself." "I agree," said another executive, Samantha. "We need to set a precedent. This is not just about one bad day. It's about the values we want to uphold. Can we trust someone who undermines that? The CEO nodded slowly. I understand, and I've given this a lot of thought. But we also need to recognize that people make mistakes. We can't expect perfection, but we can expect growth and accountability. There was a brief pause before the CEO continued. However, there are consequences to actions. This is not just about the captain's personal behavior, but about what it says to the entire company. I have to decide whether allowing him to continue in his position sends the right message. As the CEO spoke, her mind wasn't just on Captain Taylor. She was thinking about everyone in Phoenix Airlines. The flight attendants, the pilots, the support staff, who had watched how she handled the situation. They had all learned something from this experience. Leadership wasn't about making people fear you. It was about making them respect you. It was about making the hard choices, even when they were difficult. Her decision would have to reflect that. The meeting continued for hours, with everyone contributing their thoughts on the situation. The debate was intense, but in the end, the CEO had the final say. She stood up, her face composed, her voice calm but firm. I've made my decision, she said. The room fell quiet, every person leaning forward, waiting for her to speak. The captain, she began, will not return to his position as a pilot with Phoenix Airlines. The words hit like a shockwave. There was no gasping, no immediate reaction, but everyone felt the weight of her decision. The CEO had made it clear that respect and integrity mattered more than loyalty to one individual. He will be given the opportunity to transition to a different role within the company, but he will no longer be in a position of leadership. He will undergo further training in customer service, communication, and leadership. If he proves himself over time, we may consider him for a different position. But as of today, he is not a pilot for Phoenix Airlines. A long silence followed her words, but it was a silence of understanding. The CEO had shown them all that she wasn't afraid to make tough calls, even when they hurt. She had made a decision based on what was right, not what was easy. Back in the terminal, the staff of Phoenix Airlines had been briefed on the decision. The news spread quickly, but no one seemed surprised. They had seen the CEO's leadership in action. They knew that her decision was about more than just the captain. It was about the kind of company they all wanted to be a part of. The CEO took a deep breath, her gaze turning to the window once again. Outside, the planes were taking off and landing, their engines roaring as they carried people to distant places. Phoenix Airlines was a place of hope and connection, a place where people trusted that their safety and well-being were the priority. She smiled softly, knowing that this decision, though difficult, would make the company stronger in the long run. As for Captain Taylor, he sat alone in his office, the weight of the decision settling in. He had lost everything: the trust of his colleagues, the respect of his passengers, and the position he had worked so hard to achieve. But in the quiet of the room, he understood. He had made a mistake, and now he would have to live with the consequences. The captain looked down at the letter he had written to the CEO. He hadn't received a response, but now he knew. His apology had been heard, but it wasn't enough. He had to prove he could be better. It wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try. Back at Phoenix Airlines, the CEO stood before her team once again. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We are a company built on respect, trust, and leadership. We will learn from this, and we will grow stronger together." The room nodded in agreement, the weight of her words sinking in. As the CEO walked out of the meeting room, she knew that her decision had been the right one. It wasn't about perfection. It was about doing what was necessary to maintain the integrity of the company. She had set a standard, and it was one that everyone in Phoenix Airlines would follow. The CEO had faced a challenge, and she had met it head-on. The company would never be the same, but in a way that was a good thing. Change had come, and it was change that would make Phoenix Airlines a better place for everyone, passengers and employees alike. The air was thick with anticipation as Phoenix Airlines prepared for a new phase. The public had forgotten about the drama, but the company's employees hadn't. They were still feeling the aftershocks of the CEO's bold decision. What had seemed like a routine corporate scandal had, in reality, shaped the future of the airline in ways no one had expected. It had been 6 months since the incident with Captain Taylor. Phoenix Airlines was now flourishing, but it wasn't just about financial success. It was about a cultural transformation. The employees were walking with their heads held high, knowing that leadership wasn't just about authority. It was about respect, empathy, and integrity. The CEO, who had once quietly handled every challenge with calm precision, now stood as the symbol of change. She had become a role model to her staff, a woman who had set a high bar for what it meant to lead with honor. And it wasn't just her words. It was her actions that spoke louder than anything. One morning, as the CEO sat in her office, looking at her agenda for the day, she felt a familiar unease. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling that something important was about to happen. She hadn't been wrong. Her assistant knocked on the door and entered, holding a small envelope. "This just came for you, ma'am." The CEO looked at the envelope, her name written in bold letters. It wasn't the kind of letter that arrived on a normal day. There was something different about it. She opened it carefully, unfolding the paper inside. It was a letter from the board of directors. The letter was brief, but it carried weight. Phoenix Airlines had been nominated for a prestigious award, the Excellence in Leadership Award, given to the company that showed the highest standards of integrity, respect, and growth in the industry. It wasn't just an industry honor. It was a recognition of everything Phoenix Airlines had become under her leadership. The board thanked her for her dedication, mentioning that her handling of the Captain Taylor situation had set a new standard for how the company operated. They had witnessed firsthand how her strength had guided the airline through some of its toughest moments. It was because of her decision to uphold the company's values that they had been able to secure this nomination. The CEO sat back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the hard work and the struggles she had faced. The award wasn't just for her. It was for every single person who had contributed to making Phoenix Airlines a place where respect was the foundation of everything they did. But as proud as she felt, she knew this wasn't the end. This wasn't the ultimate recognition. There was always more to achieve, more to do. Her vision for Phoenix Airlines wasn't about personal accolades. It was about leaving a legacy that would inspire future generations of leaders. As the days passed, the announcement about the award nomination spread throughout the company. Employees gathered around, talking excitedly about how far they had come. The sense of pride was palpable. They had all worked together, not just as co-workers, but as a family, united under a common goal: to create a company that respected its people and put customers first. In the pilot's lounge, the air was filled with a new energy. Flight attendants were chatting in the break room, excited about what the future held, and in every corner of the airport, there was a quiet, undeniable shift. Phoenix Airlines was more than just an airline. It was a symbol of what true leadership could achieve. The CEO, who had once quietly sat in the background, had now become a symbol of inspiration. She had shown her team that leadership wasn't about status. It was about making tough decisions, standing up for what was right, and leading by example. It wasn't about avoiding conflict, but facing it with grace. One afternoon, as she walked through the terminal, the CEO passed by a group of young flight attendants who had just started with Phoenix Airlines. They didn't know who she was. At least, not at first. But when one of them looked up and saw the calm and confident woman, something clicked. She recognized her. "That's the CEO," the young woman whispered, looking at her coworkers with awe. The CEO smiled at them and nodded. Her heart warmed at the sight of the new generation of employees, people who would carry the company forward with the same values she had instilled in them. Later that evening, the CEO attended a gathering at Phoenix Airlines headquarters. The air was filled with anticipation as the company leaders came together to celebrate their journey. As the night wore on, she was called up to the stage to speak. She stood before her team, the people who had stood by her through every challenge, every moment of doubt. She looked out over the crowd and said, "This nomination isn't about me. It's about all of you. It's about the work we've done together, the respect we've shown one another, and the standards we've set for the future." Phoenix Airlines is not just a company. It's a community. The room erupted in applause. The CEO's speech had reminded them all of the values they held dear. But more than that, it reminded them that they were all part of something bigger than themselves. Together, they had changed the course of the company's history. The following week, Phoenix Airlines attended the award ceremony. The CEO stood with her team, proud of the journey they had taken. When it came time to announce the winner, there was a moment of nervous anticipation. But the envelope was opened, and the announcer smiled, calling out, "The winner of the Excellence in Leadership Award is Phoenix Airlines." The room exploded in cheers. The CEO stood, her face beaming with pride. She had done it. But this wasn't just her victory. It was the victory of everyone who had believed in the company's mission. As she walked to the stage to accept the award, she glanced at the faces in the crowd. Her team, her family. Phoenix Airlines was now more than just an airline. It was a place where respect, integrity, and leadership weren't just words. They were a way of life.